Straight up with a twist.
Today's topic, when I was in the circus. Not really a common phrase, but for me, it's a true story. So I am now part of history. I was actually part of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey. I was in the Red Unit, and I traveled around the U.S. So by train, I actually lived on the train, which is pretty cool. But I ran away and I joined the circus after high school. I had 1 year after high school where I was working a lot at Walt Disney World in Orlando, and they had an audition at Columbus Dance Center. So if you're listening, John Columbus, yes, it was there. And the pay that they were offering was $350 a week. They made it sound like they were going to include food, but basically they just meant food would be around. I'll explain. There's so many different things that go into this. So the best way to go about it is to go in order of the way that I went through it. So I went to this audition and I'm like, I am nailing it. There was really only, I think we started with like 20 people and then they narrowed it down to like 3. And I guess they really only needed to hire 2 girls. One of the other girls was like, it doesn't pay enough. And so she didn't go. And I was like, I don't know. Should I go to college? Or should I join the circus? So I, had this like graduation party. My aunt had at the time she's passed away. She passed away to breast cancer. Another topic for another time. But she bought me luggage, and she was like, "This is luggage for when you go to New York and pursue your dreams as a performer." And I was like, "Great." And I had auditioned for AMDA, which had I known at the time that they called it Scamda. But, I say it how it is, hey? But, people call it Scamda because it just seems like one of those places anybody could get into. But I didn't care. It was a foot in the door, and I am always one of those people that I don't care how I got here, I'm going to prove myself to you. So I had a decision to make. My parents, bless them, spent my entire childhood funding my dance career, and probably spent the only $700 that they had in their possible savings, even though we were paycheck to paycheck, and we lost it because I chose to join the circus. Now, my parents completely supported this. My mom encouraged it. She's like, you know what? You should start your career now. She's probably like, a $700 loss now, but it's like, $20,000 a year that your dad and I can't really afford. And I had some scholarships, but we knew that those would run out. And it's not like I couldn't still fly to New York. And I did end up going to New York and performing at Madison Square Garden. So I did. I had 3 weeks to audition, which I'll get to that. But as the story goes, I get hired. All of the rehearsals are here in Tampa, Florida, and it's at the fairgrounds, and they call it the winter quarters is what they call it. So it's during the winter season, and I'll never forget my first day in rehearsals, and we're walking around doing the parade route, like how they do the intro to all of the circus shows, and I look behind me and the elephants are right behind me, and they're all stacked on top of each other. Not vertically, but they put their front legs on the back of the butt of the other elephant, and they're all lined up. And I was like, oh my gosh. And everybody looked at me like, okay, lunatic, this is no big deal. And then they all realized like, oh, this is your first time seeing this. I'm like, yes, this is my first time. And so I thought it was just the coolest thing. And of course, like anything, you become jaded, you get used to it, things don't faze you after a while. But it was super cool. And I didn't notice it because contrary to the term when people say, oh, you're as loud as a herd of elephants, elephants have a very light step. Very smart animals. I'm sure you've watched a Discovery Channel or two, but very, very smart animals. I actually was stretching before a show one day, and the trainer walked by with one of the elephants, and I didn't even hear it. And he did not see me, and I almost got trampled by this elephant. And I was like, oh my gosh, this could have been my dying day. And it probably would have made the newspaper for one day and we would have moved on. But my first day, I was very nervous, leaving the nest. When you're a kid, when you're a teen, you can't wait to leave and start your adventure. But you also don't realize that while your parents are suffering from empty nest syndrome, you yourself are like, oh my gosh, I am detached. I am not tethered anymore. So it is very scary. And of course, that was how I built my confidence, my independence, was doing this. This is literally what made me who I am today. I mean, I was thrown out to the wild and had to figure it out. Not to mention, I was actually the oddball. I was the American woman, as all of the people would call me in the circus. American woman. They would literally sing that song as I walked by because I was actually the odd man out. It was full of Russians, Mongolian acrobats, Ukrainians, Brazilians. I mean, I was more of the oddball than anybody else. So I was the token white girl. First day in winter quarters on the fairgrounds, we do like an orientation, and it's in the giant rehearsal building. So it's basically like a giant auditorium, indoor-outdoor auditorium. And they kind of, tell us what's going to be expected. They give us all of our paperwork. We have to take TB shots because we're around animals, which I was so nervous about that. I'm very, very terrified of needles. I've gotten better, and there's a reason for that. I can't wait, guys. I can't wait to tell you all of the things. I have so many stories about my life, and sometimes when I reflect on it, I can't believe it was my life either. I'm like, did I really do that? So don't regret. Don't just look back at your life and be like, wow, like really just do anything. Just take those chances, do those things that you're like, oh, I don't think someone else would do this. Do those things because they're going to be one of the coolest things that you could ever tell anybody about. Just like take that chance. I always say, don't jump on a bandwagon. If everybody else is doing it, is it really going to be that exciting? Like choose your own path, right? It's your own journey. So we finally get to tour the train, and I'm like all excited. And my cousin had worked on a cruise ship, so she kind of explained to me how the small quarters was going to go down. And I was like, expecting it to be small, but I was not expecting it to be this tiny. I am telling you, I got in my train car, and I was somewhere in the middle of this train car, and the train is so very long. And gosh, I wish I could remember what number my train car was. It was so long ago. I mean, I was 19. I can't even remember. And I was about to turn 20. So because in the next year I turned 21 while I was still in the circus. But he showed me the room, and I literally looked at my mom and my dad. And then I looked at I don't know what he was, my manager. And he was like, I looked at him, I said, well, where's the rest of it? And he's like, that's the whole room. I'm like, well, is there a door that goes to like a bathroom? Oh no, you're sharing one toilet, one shower, and a stackable tiny washer and dryer with 12 other Brazilians. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, are you kidding me? This room was so tiny. I mean, and we had to have like those bungee cords to strap in like the tiny TV that I brought, like this little tiny TV that I had up in like a little cubby. The bed actually transformed into a table. I mean, I hit my head so many times. I actually went to the dollar store and I bought sticky vinyl flooring to like update my little floor. It took me like an entire 2 days to put it down, and people were like, what are you doing? And I had like one of those hand razor blades, and I was like cutting it to fit the corners perfectly. I'm like, I'm upgrading. Like it was like the first like attempt at flipping something. I'm like, I'm flipping this room. Like if I'm going to live in it for a year, it's going to be awesome. And tiniest little sink, tiniest little fridge. I mean, just the small, I'm like, how am I going to get groceries for a week with this tiny little fridge? Like, what am I going to do? So I immediately start crying. The guy looked at me like, ooh, like he's used to working. Because let me explain the circus for you. It is usually people who grew up in the circus that it's families. It's families, and they are there year after year. They grow up in the circus. So when I was actually done with my contract, I'm jumping forward here. I remember everyone looked at me and was like, "You're leaving?" I was like, "Yeah, my contract's over." Well, what do you mean? Nobody leaves? You're not going to do another contract? And I was like, no, that was my experience. And now I'm going to move on to something else. And everybody was so flabbergasted by that. So I think my goodbye was a little bit more emotional because I knew I wouldn't be back. The cool thing is a lot of people from my contract ended up moving here to Orlando because, like I said, the winter quarters is in Tampa. So they kind of got used to being in Florida, and eventually they did leave. Some of them left early, and then eventually the circus closed altogether. So it was really cool to, still have that connection with people locally on such a unique and private experience. And so it's like they're the only ones that know that. Like, have you ever traveled somewhere, like even if it's just Paris or Rome, like a tourist place, and then someone's talking about like where they were, like, oh, I went to this fountain. You're like, I was there. Like you kind of feel like you transported, like, like it's like a time machine. Like you feel like you were there too in this magical place. Like it's just really cool when you realize other people have had a similar experience. And it's not just oh yeah, I went to Publix today. It's like, I was also there, because traveling is amazing. My husband is completely different. He can watch something on the Travel Channel and he's like, oh, cool. And he feels like he's been there. I'm like, no. I must do it. I must transport my body there, and I must experience it for myself. All the smells, all the foods, the sights. It's completely different in person, as, most people say. So in any case, bawled my eyes out. And then my parents are like, bye. And I'm like, what? And I was like, that was the moment. I'm like, I'm by myself now. Here I am. And then I started rehearsals, and I was quickly introduced to all of the other Brazilian girls. Most of them were from Rio de Janeiro, and some of the girls were Ukrainian. And there was one other American girl, but man, did I think she was Russian when I first met her. She had broad shoulders. She could do aerial work. Her husband was Russian. She was speaking a little bit, so I thought, but nope, American. And she was super cool, super fun. So I did make fast friends with her right away. And man, let me tell you, like, what a culture shock. I literally felt like I was dropped into the middle of Asia or, Russia. Which is a part of Asia, but just different, just all of a sudden it was Mongolians and just Russians and Ukrainians. And I was just, Colombians, Brazilians. I was just, all of a sudden it was like culture shock. So I immediately was like, I better start figuring out some of these languages, but just so many different cultures. It was pretty crazy. So we do these rehearsals, and we actually are working with incredible Broadway directors. So we had Tony Stevens, who used to assist Bob Fosse. And he was such a wonderful man. And he had passed, I don't remember what year, but it's been at least over 5 years now since his passing. And then Philip McKinley, who did Boy from Oz. And boy, was he a character as well. Always very, very nice to me, but as it goes, he was a bit dramatic. I think I recall him throwing a chair or two, just letting his anger out if he got frustrated about something. The circus and Broadway, completely different beasts, right? So it's one of those things that there's always going to be a learning curve. But he wore black every day, black shirt, black jeans, black shoes. So your typical Steve Jobs director type, but really funny and charming. And was it him or Tony that had a dog? I remember there was a tiny dog that they carried around with them all the time. Maybe it was a tiny poodle or tiny Yorkie, something like that. But just those little things you just kind of remember, them walking around with their little tiny designer dog, but so much to learn. There was just so much to learn. It was really just being thrown in. So it was a little tough. I will say I was the little white blonde girl at the time. My hair is blonde. I'm naturally brunette. And, I was the new girl. I think a lot of them had been in the circus for a few years. So I guess I was interesting, maybe. And maybe I was a bit threatening to whoever, was around, their boyfriends, whoever were in the circus, unbeknownst to me, took me a minute to figure out who was dating who and all of those things. So I was getting a few side eyes in the beginning. Should we accept her? How is this going to go? Who does this Disney girl think she is? I kind of felt that kind of vibe going on. So I started picking up that some of the girls were saying things about me. So I got myself a Portuguese book and I started learning. It came with a CD and I'm like, shikara, which means like cup, like basic words. I just remember they'd be like, gente, elefante, like you say things a little bit differently. And so I started picking up, even with the Mongolians, it's really just body language. So I started picking up on that first. And then once I started learning a few words, I remember one day I snapped over while we were getting changed to start show. And I was like, I know what you said about me. And the girls are like, I'm like, yeah, I've been practicing my Portuguese. I'm like, watch out, So I was trying to say, hey, you can't get away with it like you thought you could in the first couple of months, And really those first few months, I think it was the first full 2 months, I think I cried like every night. It was so isolating. I was so lonely and everybody did speak another language. So I was trying to find, my English speaking people. And I'm like, who are my Americans up in here? Remember my troupe, they put you on a train car with your group. So it's not mixed up. Like they put the clowns on the clown car and they put the animal trainers with the animal trainers. And there's a distinctive smell, which I'm going to get to as well. So the train cars are, all attached and then in between is the vestibules. And as the train is moving, you are walking between all of these train cars to get to said destination. So whether you're visiting somebody or you're going to visit the pie car, I'll stop here to explain the pie car. The pie car is where you get your food. So that is the stop where you can go and there's a cook who will grill you some food. It looks like a little cafeteria area. Not fancy. When they described it to me, they definitely made it sound fancy. They also made me think it was a painted train, like the old school, like I was picturing this big painted train. It was just a gray, metallic train with one little red banner that said Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey. But I digress. As you are walking through these train cars to get to wherever you're going, the destination, as it's wobbling back and forth and it's loud and the pressure changes as you're changing cabins, the smells are so different. So if you're on the Mongolian cart, you're probably going to smell fish or noodles, something that they're cooking, maybe the rice, or definitely a 12-pack of Bud Light beer. Man, did they go through Bud Light like nobody's business. And then you go on the clown car, you're probably going to smell some baby powder like everywhere because they have to use that for their makeup and things like that. You walk through the Brazilian train, you're probably going to smell sweet cooking because they love to cook. So they'd always make baked goods and they would sell them for extra money on the side. Because like I said, $350 a week. Whew, that was not a lot of money. And it wasn't a lot of money back then. And it's really not a lot of money today. I mean, even after taxes, or if some states that we'd perform in, we'd get a check cut from each state. So anytime we were in Philadelphia, I'm like, no, it's $15. Cut because of the state tax. Like you really start learning about taxes as you travel and which states do what. So then my paycheck would only be like $295, but then 60 of that would go to my MCI bill or Sprint or whoever I was with my little flip phone at the time. So, I mean, I really had to learn how to manage and budget my money. And then groceries. Oh, people would do side hustles. People would buy their own foot bath, and then they would give people pedicures between shows. Oh my goodness, to make money, they would make brownies, sweetened condensed milk. Oh my gosh, always used by the Brazilians. I learned a lot of fun recipes there. So just every, train car you went through with different smells. I mean, the animal cars too, you can imagine, just to get where you were. A lot of times we'd hang out at the pie car, just if you were bored and you wanted to meet up with people. It was a nice central area to meet up, or if you knew someone, just knock on their door. I guess you could put magnets on the doors, I believe. So maybe if people wanted to leave something on your door, it would have to be magnetic. So I did this for a year. I toured with the circus for a year. I I get motion sickness. So that was a little difficult for me. I took some Dramamine the first couple of days, and then, like somebody suggested, they go, eventually it will just rock you to sleep. And it did. Eventually, the train would just rock me to sleep as long as something wasn't, falling off and hitting me in the head and it was secure. But it was really cool because if we did have long travel days, sometimes you'd wake up and you would never know what time it was because there was no, especially back then, there was no Wi-Fi, there was no connecting, there was no bars. We'd always be in a non-service area. I'm like, oh, I don't have my, 1G or whatever it was back then. And this was 2005. And I just remember sometimes I'd wake up and I didn't know if it was day or about to be night, and I'd walk out and you would just see the coolest views. I had brought a Nikon with me and was taking 35 millimeter photos. So I had to develop my film, and I was developing my film all during the tour, and I couldn't wait to get the film developed and see what came out. And I just remember sometimes you'd pass by like these glossy lakes and the mountains would just be reflecting off of them. And it was just stunning. It was peaceful and it was quiet and beautiful. And then other times we'd be traveling through the mountains, and I have some really cool pictures of this. And the train, because normally you're just on a straight path, right? But if you're going through the mountains, sometimes the train is wrapping around. So you actually can lean out of your vestibule and you can see the back and the front of the train. And sometimes you'll get these beautiful panoramic views of the entire train. Whereas if it's just on a straight path, you might not really see the full train. You're just kind of looking up and down, So I've got some really cool pictures from touring with the circus as well. And then there's it's just so crazy how you can get these, have these relationships with the animals as well. The elephants, of course, Asia, Tonka, the elephants, I remember their names. They're just lovely creatures. And I'm not going to get into the PETA stuff and my opinions on that. I do believe animals should be in a natural environment. I do not think they were terribly treated, but I don't think that's a life. So I'll say that. I think some things were exaggerated. I do believe things probably in the olden days were even worse, situations and circumstances. I do believe that people were trying to make it a better situation. But ultimately, my short opinion is I think animals are better in the wild and their natural environment. But yes, the animals, they would get the baths and they would get their, the elephants would get their toenails done and brushed and cleaned, and they had plenty of apples and carrots and just plentiful amounts of food. But yeah, it's not an easy situation. I mean, you're traveling with animals on a train in the circus. And then there's the animal walk, and you would get paid an additional $50 if you woke up at the butt crack of dawn and walked these animals, or on the last day of show if you walked the animals. Well, I chose not to do that. It was beneficial, and $50 back then was like gold. It was like, oh, that's going to help with my groceries or my cell phone bill or whatever. But I really needed my peace and my quiet. So I got to go back to the train by myself, and most of the crew would stay there and work on either helping the tech pull everything down to go to the next city. But I really just I have this whole train car to myself, and it was delightful. So I would have my peace and quiet, and I would read a book, or I'd call my friends, or write letters. Yes, I still wrote letters back then. I'd write letters to my best friends. I was in a relationship when I first started, and then that relationship ended. When you're young, everything is way more dramatic. It's like, how could he ever do that to me? How could she? I was still in America. I didn't leave the country. I still flew home at times if I had a longer travel week. I remember surprising my boyfriend, and I knew something was kind of different. We don't have to get into details on if I thought he was doing something or what his intentions were, but we were definitely pulling apart, and it was hard. I mean, I was devastated. I was like, I am on this tour. I'm alone. And I'm like, I'm trying to make it work. And it's like, he's like, you left me. And I'm like, it's just for a year. Like, it's not that big of a deal, you know. Granted, we didn't have the social media, you know, that we have today. We didn't have FaceTime and Zoom and all of those things. So really, if I didn't have cell phone service, I mean, I didn't get to talk to anybody, sometimes for a couple of days. So I was writing letters, I was writing emails, you know, paying to use, you know, to go to internet stores and use the internet at a Starbucks whenever I could, you know, using a payphone. I mean, things were just different back then. So I think things were more dramatic, and it was hard to keep tabs on people, and it was hard to trust what was going on. So I did end up spending my 21st birthday in the circus. This is not a normal 21st birthday, friends, with animal trainers and just different cultured people, some sound techs. I did end up dating a guy, and he was American from Georgia. I mean, he's Colombian, so his family was originally from Colombia. But we dated for a while, and so he ended up being like my buddy. Like I was like, oh, I have a person now. Like I have someone in case the girls hate me or something happens. I have someone, and I can just focus on that. So after that relationship ended, I kind of started a non-permanent. It was a very, flexible relationship with somebody in the circus, and he was the main sound engineer of the show. So I learned a lot about soundboards and sound engineering. So I have a lot of respect for it as well. I even got to like play around with the board one day. Like he showed me like the timing, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it now. Oh, I get it. So it was really cool. It's kind of like being a DJ, which I was actually trying to be a DJ for a minute, but learned from that, but decided not to do it. So I was in that also tumultuous relationship during not the only cool, but one of the cool things about dating him while I was in the circus. First of all, he was a really nice, wonderful person. But, he was also going through things in his personal life, and so was I. And we knew it wasn't, a commitment thing by any means, but he got to ride in a van, and it moves quicker than train. So sometimes flying, very rarely, but he would get there sooner so they could set up before the performers got there. And so I would get to go over, and they put them in hotels. So I got to be in the hotels, and that was like gold. That was like winning the lottery. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in this hotel. Look at this normal size sink. I was like, and then my room on the train actually kind of became a closet, especially towards the end of the year. I got to have both experiences of living on the train and then also seeing what it was like to travel first and stay in the hotels and have that experience. I did get to stay. I got to perform at Madison Square Garden. I was there for 3 weeks. I did some auditions in New York. It was my first time. So Pearl Studios, all that jazz. And I actually did get called back for Cats for the tour, and they asked me. So I think it was 3 days worth of callbacks while I was there. I made it work, even though I was still performing. So most of the stuff was early in the day. So, and they said, well, so you're with the circus right now? I'm like, yes. And they're like, oh, so that's Philip McKinley. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, we don't think he would like it very much if we took you away. And I'm like, at the time, trying to be respectful. I'm like, right, but... So I didn't ultimately get a contract, and I don't know if that was the main reason. It felt like it was the main reason. I mean, they were like, we would take you, it was just one of those weird conversations, and being so young, I didn't know how to handle it. I probably should have been like, no, take me now. But I was also trying to be respectful to my director, and I'm like, yeah, I totally get it. And in my heart, I'm like, please take me away. I am not making that much money. So I didn't get it. I did go back a few years later, and I was called back for the 101 Dalmatians tour 4 or 5 times. And right when I think I'm about to receive a contract, they were like, oh, we decided we're going to use real kids instead of short adults. And I was like, oh, great. Thanks for all of that. So people can change their minds, guys. People can change their minds creatively, like just so quickly. In any case, Madison Square Garden. So I'm like, I am in New York City. And it was my first time. So I knew I had to do all the touristy things. Well, I surprised my mother, and I saved up my little pennies, the few that I had, and I flew her to New York. And we did all of the touristy things. I got approval. There was no way we could have done this without the approval, but I had a room that was next to me that was vacant. There was originally 12 rooms. I guess one of the girls left and it was vacant. So I was like, well, if no one's staying in there, could my mom come and it'll be like her hotel room? And I was like, please, please, please. And they said yes. And I couldn't believe it. So, New York is so expensive. So I flew my mom out. I, got some sheets and set it up for her. And it was like her little hotel room. And she thought it was cool. She's like, oh my God, I'm staying on a circus train. And I learned the subway system. My mom was so impressed by me. She's like, oh my God, how do you know where you're going? And I guess I got it from my dad, my directionals. So my inner compass is pretty great. And so I figured out the maps and I was able to be very independent, traveling on the trains underground. And my mom got to come backstage. So she got like a, VIP pass, guest pass to come backstage at Madison Square. And that was actually where I met the shortest man in the world, the smallest human, as in, gosh, he must have weighed maybe 20 pounds. I mean, you could hold him in your arms like a puppet. I have a picture. So I will post the things that I do speak about. But it was so interesting. And he had this tiny, tiny little voice. And his wife was full-sized. I guess I'll just full-sized. That was just an interesting experience. And of course, I'm in the circus. So of course, I'm going to see all these kinds of interesting experiences. But yeah, I got to perform Madison Square. I remember we were there when it was daylight savings. And I missed the pre-show. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought my phone was going to automatically change. It did not. And I was late an hour and I was like mortified, as a professional and a performer, like being late for something is like, it's just the worst feeling. So that was only the one time that happened. And luckily it was pre-show and not the main show. I definitely learned from that mistake and that never happened again in my adult life. But it's got to happen everybody once, right? So, but you guys all know that feeling. And so we did all of the touristy things. We did the Empire State Building and it was freezing, it was March. And we went to the top and we're like, cool. We went outside. It was freezing. We're like, oh, that looks awesome. Okay, bye. We just went back inside of the gift shop, took our funny picture, left. We did the Statue of Liberty, same thing, freezing, got some cool pictures. We're like, that was fun. Spilled hot chocolate all over my white jacket that I had bought. And I was like, I'm probably going to need to buy some stuff. It was my first time seeing snow since I was a kid when I went to visit my grandparents in Ohio. So that was really cool, like experiencing snow as an adult. So we did as many touristy things as we could, tried many different pizza places. We were poor, so I shouldn't say poor, but we did not have a lot of money. So, I mean, even getting a slice of pizza was very hard for us to do. So we didn't get to do any fancy New York restaurants or anything. And even we went to one of the comedy clubs and we're like, free tickets. We totally got scammed. You're going to, you learn, it's all those things you know now that you're like, I should have known when I was younger. But, they're like, free tickets to a comedy club. And I was like, free tickets, let's go. And then they're like, it's a 2-drink minimum. And I was like, oh, no, we're good. And they're like, no, you have to. I'm like, okay, I'll just get water. They're like, oh, it's $6 for a bottle of water. And me and my mom were like, what? $6 for a bottle of water. Now, here's the thing. You get a free show. And sure, so you don't mind paying for alcoholic beverages. But at the time, I wasn't 21 yet either. So I couldn't. And my mom doesn't really drink. So I was just like, this is not for non-drinkers. Like, if you think about it, it's exclusively for drinkers. And so I was so devastated because I've always been into comedy. And I actually did get in a stand-up about 2 years ago, right before the pandemic hit. So I was so disappointed. And here's the thing. These were not famous people. These were not headliners. These were comics like me coming in and doing their sets. So, of course, I was mad and angry and I learned from it. Then my mom and I, one of the things we did that we thought was worth it at the time was the Ellen Stardust Diner. And we had so much fun. I mean, we spent way too much for a hot dog and fries, but we got to see, local performers doing their thing. They want to be on Broadway. And they were fantastic. They were so good. So we had a great time doing that. And I know they just recently gotten a new management and brought that back. So we had a great time in the 3 weeks we were there. And then I said goodbye to my mom. And so my mom got a little slice of my life and what it's like. So that was pretty cool. Just the entire experience. I got to build some really cool relationships, see what that lifestyle is like. And we had this thing called the No Talent Talent Show. And we did that at the end of the year. And it was basically just anything and everything. And I remember I was singing A Whole New World with my friend, and they start playing the track. And everyone's like, wow, Katie sounds amazing. And then we're singing and we realize this is the track. It's not my voice coming through this microphone. And so everybody's laughing. And I'm laughing, and then we sing the song. So then I'm like, well, this is just terrible. I'm like, now I'm competing against the track, the voice, I'm like, oh God, whatever. And then that was my first stab at choreographing a big group of people. And I feel like was a pivotal moment for me in earning the respect of my peers, my fellow dancer girls. And I had so much fun choreographing it. I learned how to cut music, choreograph a big group of girls, basically mashups of Michael Jackson music, and it was just so great. So we had a good time doing that. We just performed it, like on the tarmac of where we do our shows, whatever city we were in at the time, and it was really fun. I have a video of all of the performances. I think it's on a cassette tape, like a VCR tape. I need to see where that is. Yeah, I think it's somewhere on a tape. So I need to find that. So yeah, it was a crazy experience. The weather, just being in all of those backstage areas. It's all kind of underground, and it was, I just remember being freezing in most of the places that we went. Denver was crazy. The way that it opened up my mind and just learning the body language. I remember the Mongolians, I believe they'd say shoshin, which is be careful, whether it was their teachers or whoever was there to watch them, because they're all young. A lot of these were kids that were there. So they had to have some sort of parental unit there. And they would look after them, and they'd always be, Shoshin, be careful, because they were young boys running around backstage all the time, and be careful. So I kind of remember that as well. Learned a lot from the clowns, just learned about traditional clowning. It was something that I was actually like, I wonder, maybe I should do that, The Chicago acrobats, so those boys were such a good time. Also American kids from Chicago. They did some crazy tricks, just stuff that was not your typical gymnastics, acrobatic skills. And they did kind of like what the Orlando Magic dancers do, and they jump on the trampoline and they would do like a slam dunk, and they would, they'd bring a hoop out, and they had this whole scene that they did with the clowns. And then Bello Knock, just so cool. He was so great at his craft. He was I guess he was a perfectionist, really. And I never even knew how he did some of those tricks, like his quick changes. I'm like, how is he doing that? I think I know now, but I'm not going to reveal. But it was so fast. I was like, how is he doing that? I remember he would have this like green costume on, and then he would walk into this booth for literally 1 second and come out the other side in another outfit. And I'm like, how did he do that? But I think I know now. It's crazy. It's crazy to watch. And then he did the Wheel of Death. And that was also with another person as well. And you just have so much respect for these people. And touring is really difficult, guys, especially on a train, especially you're constantly bringing your life backstage to any of these things and then bringing it all back on your train to go get groceries. We all went on this old school bus that they used to transport goats on. So all of the seats, the leather seats, were ripped up and eaten. And some of these places, like the Save-A-Lots or wherever we would go to, you'd have to use the cards to get the discount. And of course, getting the discount was a big thing. So I'd always have to sign up for whatever card it was in each city that I was at. And then you just try to carry as many bags as you can without your arms falling off to bring onto the bus. And of course, people would be like, you have too much stuff. And you're like, well, okay. So it's best to be, a minimalist when you're touring. It's really difficult. And so you have to really think about, what am I going to eat for the next week? How am I going to divide up my meals, And then they also had kind of like a food truck that the chef who works on the pie car would cook out of if we were on the property. So whatever arena that we were at. So during breaks, we could go over and order a, chicken cordon bleu sandwich or something like that. But it wasn't as the way that they pitched it to me originally was like food is included. So I thought that was part. And I'm like, oh, so then the pay is not that bad. But they just meant it's there, you know. I did injure myself. I actually tore my meniscus, my left knee. And so that was awful. And I had to leave the circus for, 2 months, maybe 3. And then when I went back, it was so weird. I never got surgery. I never got it scoped. I just did physical therapy. So it's snap, crackle, pops, but hey, I'm still walking. You know, I'm scared of surgery. And sometimes I'd hear people would get knee surgery or whatever surgeries that they get. And then it still didn't heal properly. So I was like, I will be a lizard and it's gonna be fine. Like I will heal, you know? But yeah, I'll never forget too, like my 21st birthday, we went to this really cool Hawaiian bar. Like I said, I was with like a 6-year-old animal trainer, people who were not like my close friends. It was a little depressing, but like I appreciated what they did for me. And then like we had that bowl, like nowadays you never share a bowl of alcohol, right? Not with COVID. And so it's like one of those big, and they put the straws in it and then they light it on fire with the 151 shot, you know. They sang happy birthday to me, but at least the restaurant was super cool. It was really neat. I guess I felt that spirit of aloha because I ended up marrying a Hawaiian. So it was a crazy experience. If you have any questions for me about the circus, feel free to send me a message. Let me know. We always do a review of these podcasts, so you can go ahead and send me a message. It was a completely crazy experience, culture shock, but I am smarter and better for it. Let's take a quick break. Are you confused about the housing market and the current state of the economy? It can be kind of confusing. Should I buy? Should I sell? Should I rent? Should I stay? Should I go? Well, most realtors are going to tell you it's a great time to do any of those things. But I'm going to give it to you straight. Rose the Realtor, here to the rescue. You got questions? I've got answers. No matter what your financial situation is, nobody likes to feel pressured. Honesty and finding out what works best for you is really the greatest approach. I work out of the Central Florida area, and I've lived here since I was 7 years old. So whether it be high traffic areas, schools, or flood zones, I know about it. So let's discover where you're at. And if it's not now, I'd love to work with you in the future. It's simple. Send an email to katierose@topagencyrealty.com, and we'll get a conversation started. I work behind the scenes while you take the stage. And we're back. So just to clarify, when I was in the circus, I was a dancer. When Bella was hurt, I did have to do a few tricks on the trampoline. So some of the guys taught me some trampoline tricks. And then sometimes I would tumble with the Windy City Acrobats, or I would just like throw in an aerial or whatever. So I was just a dancer. They also had like the production girls that would sit on the elephants. And I remember that they were going to let me do that. And then towards the end of the year, the management team had decided that, I needed to be, trained more. And technically it wasn't my contract, but they did let me get up on the elephant. And I remember the first time in rehearsals, I would like look over, and then 2 seconds later, the girl's up on the elephant. And I'm like, well, how did she get up there? I'm like, I didn't see her like put a ladder out or anything. And they're like, no. And they're like, he just leans forward. He gives you the back of his ear, and then he gives you his foot. And then you just step up on his leg, grab the back of his ear, and you hoist yourself up there. And I was like, that is so cool. And I just remember the first time seeing that. I was like, oh my God, I want to do that. So they did let me do that one time. I say he, but all of the elephants were actually she's. And so I did get to go on the elephant. I think it was Asia. And but I think that's probably one of the coolest things, is being the production girls, even more so than the dancers. So I did that. And, they had like the production girls would like lay down and the elephant would like walk over them. That part was always scary to me. And then sometimes the elephant would poop like in the middle of it. And it was hilarious. And the girls would like roll away. They're like, oh my God. So you just got to cross your fingers that it's not time for him to go. And the shoveling guys in the circus don't get enough credit, because they're just, part of the circus. A lot of them were like former acrobats, and now they're just wearing blacks and they're running around shoveling up the poop during the whole show. They just run around with these shovels. And I was behind, and I remember I was behind the goats. And that was when I realized what goat poop was like. And it's really bouncy. Like it bounces back. Like I would step on it with my shoe, and it was so funny because it would shoot out of their butt like a BB gun, and I'd be like trying to dance around it and like avoid it. And if I did step on it, it doesn't like smear. It kind of like bounces back. So these like little squishy balls. I'm sure that's what you guys wanted to hear about today. But I started reading this book, Battle for the Big Top, and I'm actually going to pass it on to my ex, to my circus friend who I was dating in the circus. I'm going to pass it on to him. He gave me a book a long time ago, and I want to return the favor. But it was a lot about the history of the circus, and the history, like. I needed to read this book. It was cool because they talk about Feld, and I know the Feld family, and it was just cool to like be like, I know these people, and they're talking about the ringmasters, and I know the ringmasters, and we did have a female ringmaster for the first time, and she was local to Orlando as well, which is pretty cool. But the history is absolutely insane, and the whole time I'm like, I'm pretty sure that a higher power was like, stop the circus. Stop doing this. Let the animals do their thing. I mean, the fires riddled the circus. They followed them for years, forever. They followed them. And there were more than 5 fires. And, you'd think he would do it for like maybe Ringling did it for, insurance fraud or something. It wasn't, because usually he didn't come out on top with that stuff. So he was usually in debt, and then constantly, taking out more loans and earning the money back. But it wasn't just Ringling. It was all of the other circuses. So it wasn't just his bad luck. It was like circus bad luck. Like absolutely insane. And I remember there's obviously like the huge tragic story with the Big Top, because they used to make the Big Top out of this flammable material. So it literally took a cigarette, and then the whole thing came down in flames, and men and women and children. It took 11 minutes. Animals were killed. There was also another one where they did get out of the building in time, but several fires followed them. And there was one when they weren't traveling by train yet, and they were on land, and they were walking with the white horses, and the white horses just left and went towards the flames, and basically just kind of committed suicide, I guess. And one of I think it was Ringling, I can't remember who it was, came up with the idea to start a fire, and it's called like back burning, I believe. And so they started, a line in the ground to push the fire away from them. So that's just, any firemen out there, you kind of know what that back burning is. But, just so many absolute catastrophes followed the circus. It's really insane. And then they decided they wanted to take their circus to Australia, and I guess they went to New Zealand, and they did some shows there. And then at one point I guess they were hopping from island to island. I'm not even sure where they were traveling, but they were down in that southern hemisphere, and they were on the ship transporting these animals, bears in cages, giraffes, all these things, horrendous. And they all fell off the boat in a terrible storm in the sea, and they drowned and died. And I'm just like, okay. Do you not see a pattern here? I'm like, I don't think God wanted this. God was like, stop doing the circus. Stop doing this, to animals, perhaps, Some of the stuff is a little too gruesome to talk about. I guess I'll just talk about it because this is my podcast. It's real, right? So in the book, and I don't want to like be a spoiler alert, but so spoiler alert, if you don't want to hear it, then whatever. But there's this one part where they said that they were able to salvage the giraffe that had died and broke its neck, but they like put it far away in the back, like where like I guess the audience was far away for some reason, and they put like an animatronic something inside of the neck and made it move around, and like the audience didn't know any better. Like they didn't know if the giraffe was dead or alive. They were just like, oh yeah, that's a live giraffe, look at it way over there. And I'm like, that is inhumane and disgusting and like just awful. I just couldn't. Oh my gosh, like what people will do for money, right? I'm like, it's just like, what a crazy business. I can appreciate like
and I know it's controversial, but like SeaWorld and and zoos, I can appreciate like the educational purposes of it. But I will tell you the one thing that gets me the most in our general society is caged birds. I do not understand how that is legal to sell a caged bird. I do not get it. Like as a pet. Like it's like cutting its legs off. I mean, it is literally meant to fly. And people just like, oh, look at my cute bird. It lives in my house. And I'm like, what? Like I cannot wrap my brain around that. I never have been able to. Like any of my friends who've ever had birds, I'm like, I don't get it. And birds are smart and wonderful, and I'm sure they feed them and they take care of them, and they don't know any other life, right? That's the life that they know. And they're like, I love my owner, and I've seen cute bird videos. I totally have. But they are meant to fly, and they are meant to fly miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. Nothing with SeaWorld. Obviously, I've seen some of the awful things, and most of their employees didn't know a lot of these things were happening. And like the crying baby whales, I don't even want to get into it. But the educational aspect of what they're doing and the rehabilitation centers, like what they do to save animals that have been injured, is fantastic. So I can be on board with that. But obviously, I think, I don't ever think anything is so one-sided. Like I really do think you can see why things ended up the way they did, why things happened the way they did. A lot of ignorance is at play here, lots of things like that. But all in all, animals should be in their natural habitat. Obviously, house cats, house dogs, we have evolved these animals, and so they actually do better being in homes than being out in the wild. So there are certain exceptions for sure.
And of course, there's also been studies done on animals that, how long their lifespans are in the wild or in captivity and things like this. And we must acknowledge those findings. But all in all, the circus does have a special place in my heart. I can see the goodness that it brought to our world and to our understanding. And as it's really cool how people didn't ever get to see these types of animals. All of them were in Africa, and that people got to see these animals. But I think it is time to move forward. So I won't be running away and joining any circuses anytime soon, but you can always listen to me here at Katie Rose Serves Straight Up with a Twist.